Okay, so we're here with Dave Dobbs from the birthday party. So I think the first question that I'd like to ask you is, why did you decide to create the birthday party rather than just going as an independent, or possibly being affiliated with the more well-known parties?
Well, I don't think the more well-known parties would have had me, but it's a fantastic question. Fundamentally, the only difference between me and an independent party is as the leader of the birthday party, which only has 2 members, and it only costs £150 to set up a political party. That's all it costs. 2 members. There's quite a few posts that you have to fill in to be a political party. You've got to have a treasurer, you've got to have a sort of like I think you've got to have a collecting officer, or there's a few different posts. I think there's about 4 posts all told, but you have 2 people, and those 2 people can share most of the posts. I don't think the leader can be the treasurer. Well, I'm not the treasurer of the political party. I've got John Ballish is the treasurer of the birthday party. But okay, the fundamental reason is, as a political party, you have your right for your own 24-hour members-only bar. Now, when we set up the Free Party in Brighton years ago, we used to have Norman Cook. We had big DJs come and play at our 24-hour all-night meetings, which couldn't be shut down because they were political meetings. They weren't free parties, even though we called the political party then a free party. It was named the Free Party. They were 24-hour legal parties because they were political meetings, and if they were a political meeting, then they have the right to go. No one can shut that down if it's a proper official political meeting. And so a group of people can become very powerful in terms of they can really realise their rights to gather and express their political opinions however they choose, if they do it through the right channels.
Okay. That's interesting hearing that. So that kind of brings me on to my next question then. Before we actually get into what you would do if you became mayor, what is your perspective on the actual role itself? Why do you think it's come into being? And, what kind of general positives/negatives you think can come from there being a mayor of Bristol?
On the current course, I can't see many at all, actually. I'm not actually from Bristol. My father said I couldn't leave home until I was 18 years of age, and I left home and I came to Bristol. Not that I've been here ever since then. I actually became a traveller, and I'm the actual first person who's ever run for a post as a traveller. But what I see as in this process is I was actually born in Lewes, and Lewes is actually where we fought for our local elections, where Simon de Montfort came down from London with half of London behind him, and took, when King Henry III, I believe it was, thought that he could rip up the Magna Carta, which was an evolution, where it was the Magna Carta was kind of the first derivative of our common law rights, and the Magna Carta wasn't actually governing the populace. It wasn't actually governing the people. The Magna Carta was the rules and what the king or queen could do. So it was a restriction on the king's power to say, listen, you've got to treat these people fairly, you've got to have some human rights. And he thought, I don't have to give human beings human rights. And he thought he could tear up the Magna Carta. Half of London came down. And rather than killing him, they held him at knife point and forced him to sign back over the whole country to the people, which is where we got our local elections. What is actually happening here with this mayoral process is a backdoor into asking you to give over 60% of those rights that we've fought for already, which are your rights, which, okay, it's very, very difficult to make a decision sometimes. We're getting all the different councillors together and to coerce them into one single decision, because often it's big corporations like supermarkets that come in and they want corporate control. They just want big profiteering corporate control. And of course, all the local people say, oh, I don't know if I'm down with that, What about the local business? What about the local infrastructure? What about the people? And so big corporations say, listen, if we could come in here and take 60% of that power and give it over to one person, we could do away with these community problems altogether. We could just get big corporations, Sainsbury's, Tesco's, we could turn the whole of Bristol into a war machine, which it already is basically. It's completely dependent, supposedly, on the arms trade. Drones, high intellectual property designs to make killing a lot more easy, so someone can do it from a computer game console rather than actually picking up the guns themselves. And so what I'm seeing here with the whole Bristol Mayor thing is just another big strategic grab for democratic rights that we've already fought for. Why would anyone want to give up their democratic rights and give them over to a single person?
Okay. So that brings me on to my next question then. What would you actually do if you became mayor? You know, considering everything that you've just said.
Well, I mean, you can understand I do it as a bit of a protest thing, and I don't really think I've got much chance winning, but I can at least make people aware of the terrible process that's going on, of what is seen to be this kind of like, we could get rid of all this red tape, all this restriction, all these people that are standing up, stopping sort of big corporations coming in and just getting on with profiteering. You know, and so we could just get rid of all of these people, and we could, all this confusion, all this kind of, you know, all this need to sort of like, all the need for democracy. We could just get rid of all that and just have good old-fashioned corporate profit coming in. So what would I do? I would take that 60% and float it on social networks and give us a real window of what proportional representation is really like. I would take no power for myself, absolutely no power for myself. I'm not into that. It completely goes against everything that is within the sort of like heart of my sort of like understanding of what is fair and right. It's a complete, you know, you understand that I see the whole mayor process as a reversal of our democratic rights. I want to take that 60% and modernise it. Take that 60% and float it on the social networks to see what the people really want to do. On every issue, let's take that 60% that somewhat one single person could take away. Let's float that 60% on social networks and let's modernise the political process with that 60%. Because if just 10% of the people that use Facebook at the moment were to express and get involved in the political arena, we would have a political renaissance in this country.
So you mentioned before about being the first traveller. So how does that physically work then? So does that mean that you don't have an address that you're attached to? Would you have had a vote if you didn't have your own party? I mean, what was the whole process to kind of getting yourself to be in a position where you can run for mayor and to still have that status as well?
Well, when I first started doing this, I was running for mayor. I wasn't actually legally running for mayor of London, but when I first heard, I didn't understand the whole process of a mayor of London, and when Boris got into becoming the mayor of London, I didn't understand the whole process. But it wasn't until I realised that I couldn't drive my vehicle in London because of these new emission controls. And when I found out that I couldn't even modernise my vehicle without a huge cost because the controlling legislation said that I had to buy the catalytic converters from a specific body, so it wasn't open to a competitive rate. I had to buy the emission system through a very specific body, which meant that it was going to cost me £2,000 or £3,000 to enable me to modernise my vehicle or to make it sort of like, you know, to make it, you know, environmentally clean enough to drive on the streets of London. Now, it would cost me effectively a lot less if I could use other more competitive bodies. But of course, this is about a corporate lockdown. This is about corporate control. This is about giving over the contract. And this is what the whole thing about having a mayor of London is. It's not about being fair. It's about having control over over everything. So one person says, no, I'm going to have my little friend over here and he's just going to make sure that you can only buy the things off him. And guess what? You gave me the power and that's what I'm going to do. So sod you. It's going to cost you £3,000 or you buy a new vehicle. Well, my vehicle's only worth £2,500. Now remembering it costs 100 times more fuel in terms of, it consumes 100 times more fuel to manufacture a vehicle than the vehicle will consume in its life. It's not really an efficiency move. It's just a big business move to drive the sales of new vehicles again. And so from that capacity, I saw this thing happening in London. I wasn't on the electoral roll in London. I'm a traveller. I couldn't get on the electoral roll. So I went to London and I decided to do it without the electoral. I didn't have the £10,000 to run. So I went to London. I lived outside the Guardian, outside the Guardian offices in my cycle-powered rickshaw. And I lived on the Occupy sites. And I basically ran the whole thing without running for mayor, without actually paying the money. And I realised I couldn't do it. And then I got in contact with Community Base and said, I'd really like to do this, but unfortunately I'm not on the electoral roll. And it was Community Base in Brighton that informed me that I didn't actually have to have an address if I wanted to run for a post in government or if I wanted to vote. And that was the first time I ever realised that the vote belonged to me, that it was my ancestors that fought for my right for vote. It wasn't the bankers. My vote doesn't belong to a property. It seems that you've got to have a postal address, but I didn't realise you don't. you can actually go down and claim your right to vote as a no fixed abode status and claim your right to vote, and then you claim your power back, which means that no debt agencies can come looking for you. It's your right, it's your vote, it's your voice.
Okay, so I mean, in the booklet that's been given out, kind of given brief overviews on each candidate, yours mentions about something you thinking that water from Earth may have been from Mars, or I mean, is that something that they've taken out of context? Is it something that you specifically wanted in there? I mean, what's the story behind that?
Well, I mean, it's a bit of a crazy story, really. You're in your hand right now. You're holding on to my book, I can see.
Yep, Laughing Gas.
Laughing Gas is a crazy story where. In 2006, and this, I'm trying to answer this question because it's in the most roundabout way. It is a bit of a politician's answer, even though I would never really see myself as a politician. But in the most roundabout way, Laughing Gas was, I was at a festival in 2006, and I had a blast of laughing gas. And it was Reading Rock. It was a bit of a crazy festival. It was a bit of a crazy time. I was having a crazy time in my life, as it was. I had this blast of laughing gas at Reading Rock, and I had what could be called an epiphany, except it was so tragic. I was just left sitting in this field crying my eyes out. And my friends were saying, what's wrong, what's wrong? And I'd seen what felt like I saw the apocalypse. I didn't really know what I saw, but it was probably the saddest day of my life. And basically no one really could handle me. My partner couldn't handle me. I mean, it was just a real upheaval in my life, and it led to me sort of going off and trying to find out what had happened to me. It plagued me for a long time. I was just carrying this sadness. It wasn't like in my head, it was in my heart. And I just carried this sadness for probably the best part of a year, 2 years, before I finally decided to go off on a quest and see if I could find out what this sadness that seems to had suddenly landed. It was almost like this big, like Titanic of sadness that just suddenly landed on top of me. I didn't know. So the book was this quest to try and find out what had happened. And in this book, I started looking at. I can feel myself getting into a really dangerous space with this, but basically, I started looking at a lot of different influencing factors, and one of the biggest influencing factors I started looking at was the influence of what I understood was war and the god of war. And I'd always heard that Mars was the god of war. And now we had, when you're writing a brochure and that sort of stuff, and you're looking at all the different influencing factors that are affecting us. War seems to be the biggest thing that's affecting this world in such a negative way. It's dragging us down. And so I wanted people to read people to read the whole blurb. And I wanted to really touch on something which is in my satirical sort of style of politics. And so the only way I could really do that was to write something where you would open that thing up and you would see that and you'd read it, and then you'd flick a few pages, and then you go straight back to it, because you knew the rest was just going to be political, horrible, ugly blurb, and then you're going to turn around, see the pink, see the tidal wave, see, is Dave Dobbs insane to believe that water came from Mars? When in reality, if you actually think about what is insanity, that's why I say, is Dave Dobbs insane to believe the water came from Mars? Actually, insanity by definition is doing the same thing over and over and over again. And we are now about to go into another war. And we've got troops amassing on the Syrian border in Jordan now. We know that Syria is the next on the chopping block. Even though Syria manufactures everything itself, it's a completely self-sufficient nation and makes everything. It's Iran's sort of brother and companion. They work together. Mohammed Ahmadinejad is a very, very sort of like, is a massive supporter of Syria, and Syria is a massive supporter of sort of like of Iran. So they've got this very strong relationship. We know the strategic position of Syria right on the sort of Mediterranean coast. We're looking at sort of like all the different situations, and we can see another war coming up. We can see what is a repeat of everything we're doing again. We know what's going on. If we try to pretend that we don't know what's going on, that is a definition of insanity. That is a true definition of insanity. And so I'm trying to offer what looks like insanity, but that's the first time I've ever mentioned that water came from Mars. So if it's the first time I've mentioned it, it's not actually insane. It's mad, but it's not insane. What we are doing right now with our warring insanity is insane. Okay. So I'm trying to just basically gently point the finger at the masses and saying, don't be insane. See what you're doing. Don't allow this to happen again, because if we get dragged into this next war with Syria, which means a war with Iran, we will properly be at war. We will know what it's like to really be in a war. And if Bristol becomes one of the main manufacturing bases of weapons, then Bristol becomes a very strategic, legitimate target in that.
Okay, so on one hand, if you became mayor / the person who becomes mayor, what is it that you would do / advise in terms of our positioning inside of these wars? Because obviously we know that, you know, London's kind of the centre of what a lot actually goes on, but considering the actual position, the 60%, you know, what it is that they will be able to do, or what is it that you would do in terms of cutting ties to the military side of Bristol? How would you kind of start that process?
Well, I mean, all this intellectual property, you know, we're told that we need drones for sort of like war, we need drones for sort of like public control, we need drones for spying and that sort of stuff. You know, we're told that we are dependent on the arms trade. That just seems a bit of a tragedy, doesn't it? You know, if as a mayor, what you can try and do is address the issues of, you know, people say that like there's a ceremony at the moment. There's a ceremonial role as a mayor. Mm-hmm. People say, well, he has no power. But actually, you look at when people say he has no power as in a ceremonial position, and then you look at a newspaper or a television channel, or you guys here running a sort of like a little sort of independent media sort of like media channel. You know, this is power. That's real power. You've got no elected power, and yet you can reach people. You can sway people, which means you have power. A newspaper has no elected power, and it can hang, draw, and sort of quarter people sort of like at the flick of a finger. You know, really, you know, there's no need to give away the democratic rights of our country or this city to a single person to give away that power. It's lame, it's nasty, it's low level, you know, so I'm not down with this kind of like, I'm not down with this thing of taking this power and utilising what would I do with this power, what would I change? I can only give it back, I can only float it on social networks. I cannot take that power and utilise it to take control away from the democratic process, because I don't agree with that.
Okay. And lastly then, obviously talking to you now, it's kind of made me a little bit clearer on what your position, how you feel you're kind of, I suppose, affecting this whole campaign in terms of, you know, your actual aspirations. But my question would be then, so let's say that you know, you don't get elected. What is it that you're going to be doing after then? So where will the birthday party be, and what will your aims be at that stage?
Well, I think that what's going to happen is that whenever a big institution or some sort of private body of people move in to take control of a certain situation, what happens is, at the moment, I think that where a corporation comes in to sort of like make a big grab on, be it property, be it on local sort of like government, be it on residential area, be it on be a corporate profiteering grab on some kind of asset. Whenever that happens at the moment, it seems that they take one step forward and immediately go 2 steps back. Now, Stokes Croft is a classic, fantastic, amazing example of that, isn't it? You know, you saw a big corporation, Tesco's. They came in, they knew they wanted to have a local store in Stokes Croft, but they didn't know how they were going to get it because the people would react to it. So what they did is they did a sly one. They tried to pretend to be a small little grocer and gain planning permission as a small little grocer, pretending they're only tiny, and then transfer that sort of application over to themselves being actually a big corporation, moving in more on local business, taking more of the sort of like local revenue that's coming into that community, which is keeping that community alive. You know, and so we saw a reversal of, we saw them doing this underhanded trick to come in the back door and say, oh, we can come in the back here, we can do our corporate control here, we can get our money, and it will worked against. And I think that's, you know, that's what we're seeing here in the same in the I've actually completely forgotten the actual line of the original question there actually.
Well, no, it's just what would you do afterwards?
Afterwards,
you know, after the election's been made.
It's after the election is actually, after the actual election's made, it's just, you know, I did Mayor of London, I'm doing Mayor of Bristol. I mean, I'm sort of more centred around Bristol than anywhere else, and there's local elections coming up, I think next year. What I'd like to do is get more people involved in Bristol in local elections and make, I want people to get involved in politics really. I want to bring colour to it, because it's stagnant at the moment. No one really knows what's going on. You've just got this corporate, horrible political spin on everything. It's ugly, it's boring, it's trashy. People are just being bored out of the arena. If you want to make something interesting, then you make it interesting. If you want to make something fun, then you make it fun. If you want to make something boring, then you make it boring. You put a grey facade on it, you make it really sort of like drivelly, horrible, ugly, stagnant, and then it becomes drivelly, horrible and stagnant. And that is the picture of the political system at the moment. No one wants any involvement with it. You mention it and people are like, you're running for mayor. It's ugly, it's corporate, it's horrible. Let's make it colourful. The birthday party, it's all about, for me, the birthday party is just literally about our sovereignty. We have true sovereignty. I believe we have true sovereignty. We come into a beautiful, colourful identity when we realise that we're at peace. When we truly send it up to the universe and say, I am at peace. I am a peaceful being. I have no bad feeling or any sort of negative intention to any being out there. It's when you send that out to the universe, you become. I think you become sovereign. I believe you become sovereign. I know. I believe I'm a different person when I realised that I was a peaceful being and that I represented peace and that was the corner I was going to stand. I was not going to just keep it as a little back thought in the back of my head, but I am a peaceful being and I'm going to shout peace from the sort of like from the street corners, and I'm going to walk around with my pink rickshaw and say, listen guys, you don't have to embrace. You're told that Bristol needs this war. You're told that you're completely dependent on the arms trade. I don't believe any of it, and I'm going to keep shouting that out. This has got nothing to do with the Bristol Select Mayor thing. This is just my message, and it's ongoing, and I'm going to keep shouting it out over and over and over again.
Okay, well, yeah, thanks a lot. It's great talking to you.
Thank you very much.